Hi, I'm Rob Cohen. I'm the director of The Fast and Furious, and as Vin Diesel says later on in the movie, let's go for a little ride. Fast and Furious started in January of the year 2000 when Executive Vice President Scott Stuber gave me an article from Vibe magazine about illegal street racing in Queens, New York. I read the article and didn't see the movie in it. Later that week, I went out to my first illegal street race, and the amazing scene that I saw out there on San Fernando Road at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night made me think otherwise and put me to work with producer Neil Moritz and screenwriters Eric Berquist, John Pogue, David Ayer, and the uncredited Carrie O'Salem to put together a story which would capture this amazing world and let it ride on the rails of a hijacking crime plot which is being set up here in the first scene. In the summer of the year 2000, we began to shoot, and this first sequence was an interesting challenge because in a sense it's a Western. This is stolen from John Ford's Stagecoach. Is it stolen from John Ford's Stagecoach? Well, basically, if you think of the 18-wheeler as the stagecoach, and you think of the Honda Civics as the horses that the bad guys, dressed in black, appropriately wear, they surround the stagecoach, they aboard the stagecoach, and get to the stage driver, thing stunt, boom, the little digital magic to remove the safety ramp for the stuntman. They take the stagecoach driver, who valiantly fights with the butt of his shotgun, in this case a Louisville Slugger, and take him down, usually throwing him off the stagecoach, but we didn't want our villains to kill anybody because ultimately this movie is leading to a very, very important and somewhat controversial conclusion about the fate of the cop and the criminal in the final scenes of the movie, which we will get to in about an hour and 50 minutes. Anyway, once they take the stagecoach, there's usually a cliff or some other thing looming with runaway horses. And here was our solution: the construction highway that narrows down to one lane, and the car that has to slip in under the truck. Stunt, which I might add, probably added $50 million to the gross of the picture. Transition from night LA to day LA was our first declaration of a stylistic conceit that this movie, although based on the streets, was going to have an operatic and highly intensely visual nature, so that the transitions were not standard dissolves. They were visual effects that eliminated traffic, cars, and anything that people that moved, so that we could go from night to day or day to night seamlessly. The introduction of the first star in the film, Paul Walker, and this shot here, shot at Dodger Stadium, was shot on the very first day of shooting and actually was one of the defining shots of speed. It's held for about 17 seconds, and it shows how fast these rice rockets, in this case an Eclipse, can actually go and what it feels like to drive 140, 150 miles an hour on a city street, or in this case, a baseball stadium parking lot. In Echo Park, part of the production design concept that I worked out with Valdemar Kalinowski, the production designer, was to show a new LA. LA of neighborhoods, an LA of individual houses, small stores, old architecture, not the stucco anonymous LA of endless television series episodes, and to try to show the hills, an aspect of LA that's not often thought about, since LA is usually thought of as flat, but it has a beautiful spine of the Hollywood Hills running right through the city, and this feature is used throughout the picture. Dana Brewster, undoubtedly one of the most beautiful women working in the cinema today, and a very talented actress, and the introduction of the great Vin Diesel. His signature bald head, his strength, his bear-like presence, contrasting with Paul's sort of classic American male beauty. And we're beginning to set up the two poles of this film that will course of most of the conflict, both physical and emotional, and the fulcrum between the two poles, Jordana Brewster's character as the sister of one and the lover of the other to come. Here's an introduction for more beautiful cars. Obviously, this film would revolve greatly around the most idealized, off-the-hook, dope-ass rice rockets that could be achieved in all of the world of illegal street racing. And here, talking about dope-ass, is the introduction of Michelle Rodriguez, one of the most interesting actresses to come along in a very, very long time, and someone who made quite a mark for herself in this film. Beautiful Cars is the co-starring cast. Chad Lindbergh as Jesse, Matt Schultz as Vince, Johnny Strong as Leon. Three very interesting, colorful textures that the film needed to balance out the male cast. And of course, the three guys are hardly the equal of one Michelle Rodriguez. We're in the Toretto market here, beginning to see some of the character dynamics of this dysfunctional family and the love story between Michelle Rodriguez and Vin Diesel, which was really not in the script, which we began to invent in this first week of shooting to create a presence for her in the film. Here, I had Chad Lindbergh very often comment, and Johnny Strong comment, on Paul Walker's good looks, because it was important to me that his role as an undercover cop, that we don't just assume that the audience will accept that Walker is just your average LAPD kind of guy, that we are telling the audience that we know he's in fact a special, very handsome, almost beautiful, charismatic presence, and those little interchanges were to set that up. This fight was interesting. It had been choreographed by stunt coordinator Mick Rogers, but when the actors saw the choreography, they felt that it was too choreographed, and they wanted to mix it up for real between the two of them and really throw some punches and really, make it like a real street scuffle, which I applauded. Always willing to let actors smash each other unless they have enough energy to fight with me. I decided to shoot this scene with 3 handheld cameras from all at the same time, from different angles, so that the matching and the kinetics would be very possible in the editing. And this was part of setting a standard of how to...
Sorry, interrupting by my dad.
Create a lot of editing possibilities in this film to do things that were kind of unorthodox that you're going to begin to see here. Cuts that come from handheld to angles that are quite similar to angles that are quite radical, that will in fact create much more of a dynamic feeling than your standard shooting of a scene like this. The purpose being that I felt that every scene had to race. This was a film about speed. Speed was the essence, the heartbeat, and the soul of this movie. How do we capture speed in a new way? Not just speed in the race scenes or the hijack scenes, but the entire narrative should be fast and should be furious. And if we fell short of that, I thought the film would cleave into 2 parts. The racing and action scenes would be one part of the movie, and then there would be these blab scenes. So I decided to shoot even the most expository blab scene as if it were a race. So if you watch the scenes, you'll see that the camera is in constant motion. The editorial style is to constantly change the perspective, even if it's just a slight change of perspective, to create a feeling of energy, but not the kind of crazy energy of a rock video where you can't tell where you are. Always to keep you oriented. I wanted the audience to always know where they were, but to feel the dynamism of shots like these, this kind of tracking shot, all kinds of things blitzing through the frame, all kinds of verticals to break it up so that you would feel the dynamism. Out to show the ideal Performance Parts Auto Shop, back in, boom, the NOS tank, a very important element. Nitrous oxide, the gas that's going to double the horsepower of these engines, make these cars go as fast as 180 miles an hour. Here's another of my favorite transition shots. This is actually the LA vegetable market or produce market. We took it over at night and staged a kind of operatic scene with our homages to West Side Story, to other street opera movies that have been classic films, or the Corman AIP films where we got our title, The Fast and Furious. We actually traded Roger Corman stock footage for the rights to use the title from, I think, the film, which was his film, which was called The Fast and Furious, made in 1958, I believe. Here is the first view of the scene. Now, when I went out that night on San Fernando Road, this is what I saw. This is what made me fall in love. This is exactly my experience that night. This multi-ethnic, multi-culti, as I call it, multicultural world of Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, Afro Americans, white Americans, all these inner city guys and girls hanging out and without racial tension, speaking the common language of the car and more interested in racing than any kind of racism. And that knocked me over. Because these years ago, if it were Boys in the Hood, these people would be shooting each other. And here, they were really just interested in who had the best car, who had the best paint job, who was the best driver, best designer, or who had the prettiest girlfriend, or the coolest navel ring. Here we have Ja Rule, the hip-hop star, who again came on the set that night with not much of a part, and we started he and I to improvise a new role, a new part of a guy who is part of this race, but who's racing for a menage a trois that he's going to be promised, and a small little arc of a character, but one I'm very fond of. And of course, through Ja, we got the song, Do It Fast, Do It Furious, and ultimately our soundtrack album deal with Def Jam and Murder Inc., his label, with the Gotti brothers, and which gave us our platinum soundtrack album. Ja in the movie, which was really Neil Maritz's, the producer's idea, turned out to be the key to our enormous musical success with the film. This, by the way, was done by rave DJ artist BT. It was my thought that rave music was the kind of pulsing electronica which could hold all of this together and would make a very beautiful, energetic bed for the action, the characters, and the songs would be not typical of, 100 violins sawing away with the London Symphony Orchestra. At any rate, all of this is true. This is how it's done. Bets are laid, and they wait until they have an opportunity to go to one of several tracks to race on, streets to race on, when they know that the police are occupied elsewhere with a murder, robbery, whatever. They have police scanners, radios that let them know what's going on, and the scene is highly organized, although there never seems to be the appearance of any organization. So what you're going to see in the next following sequences, the next number of scenes of the race world, is actually how it's done. It could be a documentary, a glamorous documentary, but a documentary truth nonetheless. As Chad Lindbergh calls out the qualities of these engines, this is the language of the Rice rocket. This is the complexity of these computer-controlled fuel injection front-wheel drive engines that can be rejiggered in 1,000 different configurations, left only to the automotive cleverness of the designers or racers. And believe me, these young guys and gals know their cars better than Detroit. If Detroit knew what these kids know, we wouldn't have a flagging auto industry today. Like that night on San Fernando Road again, I saw them suddenly drive out and went to the street and lined up under a bridge to race 2 at a time. The fact here that they're going to race 4 at a time is the only falsehood And I knew it was false, but I just felt it'd be more interesting to see 4 cars blitzing down the street than 2, which is normal, or 3, which they do sometimes. Again, here come the wet dreams of the rice rockets of the racing world. Here are the absolute best cars and some of the best women that we have in Los Angeles. And also, again, true to the ethnicity, a lot of Asian Americans. This sport started, I think, by and large on the West Coast with Asian American kids, and I wanted to keep that clear. Now, this pizza man is somebody I should have fired because he's a terrible actor, and I guess it's me doing my Hitchcockian cameo. 4 cars, the music's wailing, the gals are spray painting the start mark. Characters are on scene. It's one of the interesting challenges in this film is that a lot of films, you have 2 people talking and then another few people talking and another scene of a few people talking. And this film, almost all the characters were in every scene. And that may not sound remarkable if you're just watching the movie, but if all these people have to get through hair and makeup, and all these people have to be directed, and all these people have to be choreographed and photographed and covered, it becomes quite complicated. We see the next thing I had invented, which is the bet that Ja Rule gets. Now, this girl was not an actress. She actually was just in Ja's trailer, and I liked her, and I asked her if she wanted to try it, and she gave it a whirl, and since she knew Ja quite well anyway, it all kind of worked out. Ja has a good life. Anyway, here Paul Walker, character Brian O'Connor, deciding that even though we know from Dodger Stadium that he can't even control his car at 140 miles an hour, he's bet the farm, he's bet the pink slip that he can beat Vin Diesel, the king of the streets, and he's betting his car on that. And here you see the computerization that controls the NOS, the intercoolers, the amount of NOS gas that will be injected at any given time, and the manifold controls. Here is the answer. Vin Diesel has his own NOS system because, after all, he is the king of the streets. This is R.J. DeVera, who was one of our technical advisors, actually was a champion racer in the illegal street racing scene. Tell the police that he was in the movie because they're still looking for him. Anyway, Johnny Strong now on the police scanners, hearing that there's a 187, which is a code for a murder at a liquor store somewhere close by, that the police will be preoccupied, time for them to go race. Here's the shot that defined for me what I was trying to do with this film, flying through the engine of the RX-7, the Wankel engine, the rotary engine, trying to show that these drivers were at one with their car, that the car was an extension of them. And here is a 2-minute sequence done almost entirely with visual effects that represents a 10-second race. I took 10 seconds and expanded it to 2 minutes. And with the brilliant sound design of Bruce Stambler, Academy Award-winning sound designer, and Soundstorm, his company, we began to dig into how to do speed in a new way, a way not seen in previous racing films, in a way that we go in the cars, through the cars, around the cars, from car to car. Because what I realized one morning while shaving is that the only way to get speed was to not treat the racing as it lived in the real world, but treat it like it's a science fiction film, just like we're going in Star Wars into hyperspace, that these are spaceships, not cars. And as free with the camera as I would be if this scene were done on a planet far, far away. Right? Most of the cars you're seeing, like this car here, they don't exist. These cars are created in the computer, and we put the actors in them. Illusion Arts, Digiscope, and Hammerhead, 3 very, very creative visual effects companies, all work together on this sequence to create each of these moments with me to take you aboard the street race and let you know what it felt like to go 140 to 180 miles an hour on a city street in the middle of the night. And I'm very proud of this sequence, and every time it played in movie theaters across the country where I was, the audience would break out into applause, and that let me know that this film was well on track some 20 minutes into its unspooling. Important thing I realized on the night of shooting, that I had to show that Paul Walker's life was forever changed by this experience. Even though he had lost, something about this race had changed him, that he was no longer the same person 10 seconds later, or 2 minutes later in the course of the film, that he was when the arms went down to start the race, when Noel Giuliani, who plays Hector, very fine actor, when he flagged the race. Paul Walker's one person, 10 seconds later, he's another. He's addicted to speed, he loves this world, and this love is going to come into strong conflict for him as a character.
No problem, nigga. You didn't win.
The end of Ja Rule, not getting his menage a trois, and not feeling too good about it. But Ja, platinum albums loom for you, and you'll have all the menage a trois you ever need. We all know we need a couple in life. Here we come to one of my favorite scenes because of the good-natured quality that Vin and Paul brought to the moments of losing a car and in a funny way, gaining respect for each other. This was a wonderful theatrical setting for Vin Diesel to strut his stuff. And every kid you see in the background there, these aren't extras. These are the real illegal street racing creme de la creme of LA. And it's part of why I think the film has such a real feeling, is that we didn't just go to SAG and pull a bunch of people who were pretending. These are the real people. And David Ayer, who has such a talented ear for dialogue, as he absorbed the street racing world as a writer, he was able to create the language that Vin is talking now, and that these kids knew, we knew what we were talking about, and they fell right in step with every scene. And so all of the crowd scenes you see, these are not actors, these are real street racers, and these are their cars. And scenes like this, again, were choreographed. I'm up in a helicopter, I'm down on the cranes, I'm everywhere, trying to give you as many dynamic angles of this mass crazy exodus, because this is what happens. As they scream "Popo, Popo, Popo," the police are coming, and these cars, their cars will either be impounded or they'll be given $1,000 tickets, at least in LA, for illegal street racing. So they want to get the hell out of there, and get the hell out of there they did. When I proposed that all 200 of these cars be driven by their original owners, the street racers, the Mick Rogers, again, our stunt coordinator, got very nervous. But with a little choreography, we did this, 10 times. Not even a fender bender. These guys and girls know how to drive. At any rate, the next sequence takes place about 20 miles from where that sequence was shot, down in downtown LA. And again, Vin Diesel, being known as the king of the streets, they're looking for that RX-7, and him just barely getting away from the cops for the moment. Vin is a new kind of leading man, a multi-ethnic, very, very unusual guy, a cross between a young Brando and Yul Brynner, and a lot of himself. Something new, and I believe the fastest rising young star in our business today. In fact, my next film, Triple X, which someday I'll be doing the DVD of, will star Vin Diesel, and we will start shooting about 10 weeks from when I'm doing this narration, and it will be out July 26th at a theater near you in the summer of 2002. Here's the next plot development, that Vin is in trouble, Dominic is in trouble, and who comes to his aid but Brian O'Connor, the very guy to whom who lost his car, and here he is coming to the rescue, and a different kind of driving, a very different style than driving a quarter of a mile in a straight line, kind of a pursuit driving or evasion driving, which is a very different skill. And rightfully so, Dominic is a little nervous because it isn't going fast in a straight line, it's going fast in every kind of curve possible. Did that car jump? I don't know. I just wanted it to jump. So we put down a few little jump ramps, and it made a nice ending to the scene. It's a very interesting scene because it works on many levels. The guys are getting to know each other, and not only are we finding out certain things about each one, in a way, we're also finding out that when Vin Diesel took the wallet from Brian Earl Spillner, he and Jesse did a background check, and
Sorry for the hearing the door noise. I did close the door.
found out Brian's real backstory, or so they think. Of course, this is going to be reversed a few scenes from now in the film. Find out Brian's real backstory. But at this moment, it's a twist on a twist. Just a little one, nothing to make film history, but just it's these little dynamics throughout this picture that I think makes the film more than just a race picture or a street racing film or a car film. I think it's a film that hooks you and begins to say to the audience, you know, these are relatable characters. They're kind of like you and me. It was an introduction of Reggie Lee and Rick Yoon with the South Vietnamese American gang. Very interesting character, Rick Yoon, very handsome, 6'2", very strong, Korean American, but you know, a choice that I made, which I thought might be controversial, in using an Asian American actor to play the villain, but having done Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, and written that, I felt that I could free Asian American actors up to play anything, villains, heroes, lovers, whatever. So that once I met Rick, I saw no reason to take such an incredible talent, not use him for some thought of being politically correct. I think the key to actors is that they should be free to play anything they want to play based on their talent, as opposed to their racial origins or whatever. So we have a movie which has a hero in Paul Walker, an anti-hero in Vin Diesel, and a villain in Rick Yoon. All three sort of slots in the traditional archetype scale taken in this film. They have a hero and an anti-hero, or a hero and a villain. In this one we've got the full spectrum. Was in Snow Falling on Cedars, has a tremendous presence and a very, again, a different texture, different tone, different color on the palette to Paul's all-Americanness, Vin's complex multi-ethnicity, and again, the kind of operatic street opera of West Side Story told in the year 2001 with the coolest bikes, the coolest cars, and sometimes the coolest death of the coolest cars. And here we go. Theaters, when this was screened, people groaned. Kids were banging their heads against the seat in front of them. No one wanted to see this eclipse go this way, including me. And my 14-year-old son, Kyle, will still not talk to me for doing this to such a beautiful car. The wonderful pyrotechnic effects of Matt Sweeney. He and his company did all the mechanical effects, all of the stuff you see, that the explosions and rigging and shootings and so on. A very talented group. And here we are, we leave Little Saigon, and magically we are back in Echo Park, some 30 miles away. A very expensive cab ride. And I always thought it was funny, these two great racers having to go home from the great street race in a taxi. But at any rate, here comes a couple of my favorite shots of Jordana. We realize that even though she has a cool exterior towards Paul Walker, it's not that cool. She has interest in him, as shown when her brother invites Paul in, and she realizes she's not looking her best, studying as she is at home at night. Now, if everybody could look like her at home at night when they're studying, we'd have all stayed in college. Schultz is a guitarist. He's really playing this riff. He has a band. He and Johnny Strong are both bands and come from music before they went into acting. And so we wanted to let him show off what he could do. A very funny guy who you'll see in the upcoming Ridley Scott film from Revolution Studios, Black Hawk Down. Very interesting actor and got a wonderful sense of humor and a way of investing a part which really didn't exist on the page, and he made a great deal out of very little that was scripted for him. And in this scene, some things also begin to emerge, which is Vin's anger and his paternal presence among this group of people is established through feeling let down by his posse, by his team, that they didn't come to help him when he needed it. And the person who did help him was the outsider. And being Machiavellian, and Vin and I talked about this, he uses the outsider to reestablish his supreme position in this family unit, to let them know that he is capable of turning his attentions to new energy if people do not toe the line and if they let him down. And by bringing Paul Walker's character into the party and giving him the beer, a good laugh, but also shows his second in command, his old friend, Vince, that he really cannot neglect taking care of business. In this thing, this was one of my favorite little one-liners here, where he says, "There was a time I didn't know you," he says, "Yeah, that was in the 3rd grade." And right in that little interchange, it tells a whole story. These guys have been buddies since elementary school. They've grown up in the same neighborhoods. They know everything about each other. And they've got each other's backs and have had each other's backs for a long, long time. These are very deep, very, very powerful relationships. And the complexity of that, I think, was part of the film's appeal. That people saw themselves or their ideal self in this group of actors and in this world. Sneak preview in our focus group, when all the kids were saying how much they liked the film, the focus group leader said, "What did you like about it?" And the first reply was, "I liked the movie because it showed honor among friends." And I got a lump in my throat because these were some of the quiet ideas that I was trying to work with, and to see that the audience was going to get something out of this film besides thrills was thrilling to me. Jordana and Paul get to know each other. It was a very interesting editing challenge because these are two of the best looking human beings ever birthed. And somehow when they're together apart from the rest of the cast, there were times when, in a way, I thought they were too pretty for the movie. Yes, the editor and I kind of looked for the takes where it's not where they were less good looking, but where their acting was earthier and less glossy, to keep them integrated and keep their story integrated into what is otherwise a colorful but earthy street opera. Here we have the plot about to turn, and we're some 30 to 37 minutes into the picture, and up till now we've pretty much accepted Paul Walker as what he has presented himself as, a hopeful, a wannabe in this street racing world. In this scene, busted by the police, we're still assuming it has to do with the night before until here, and we begin to see that in fact he's not all up front. And there were literal groans in the theater when they realized he was a narc, an undercover cop, and it was a good moment because the film needed to twist right at this time.
Wow, and that's true.
People have said, why did we need to do this? I felt we needed to do it because you just can't sustain 2 hours of the street racing world. At least I didn't believe we could. Maybe some other directors could, but to me, it was a lifestyle movie, not a race movie, not a sports movie, and not a crime movie. It was a lifestyle movie, but it had to be hung together on some plot vectors. So this was the plot we chose right from the beginning. And yes, it does have references to Point Break, and yes, it does have references to Donnie Brasco. Two very fine films, and if you're going to refer to other movies, refer to the best. Refer maybe being a euphemism for steal, but whatever. The movie's made $143 million this summer to date, and I'm pleased with that, and I suppose that's a validation of the choices we made, no matter what one would think. Begin the police procedural, which personally, in spite of the heroic efforts of Ted Levine, playing Tanner, the rabbi or guide of Paul Walker in the police department, Tom Barry playing the bit of the asshole of Bilkins. These procedural scenes are my least favorite in the film. Directed a lot of Hooperman, Miami Vice, Private Eye, so on in my television directing careers, and some of that police material is beautifully written and very insightful about law enforcement. These scenes keep the plot moving, but don't bring us into the depth of that. They serve the purpose that we need them to serve, but they are, just not up to the rest of the film. It's a great relief when we get back to the world of cars, Vin Diesel, beautiful girls, and the racing scene. There's Michelle, who got into this so deeply, wants always to show that women can do anything that men can do, be it boxing, mechanic work, driving, or lovemaking, whatever, that she wants to go beyond the limits that have been imposed on women in the film world or in the world, and I support her totally. Interesting to note that the scenes of Paul Walker were shot at night, and Erickson Core, our fine cinematographer, everybody else was shot during the day. We ran out of light, and he managed to light Paul to look like day.
This will decimate.
Tried to create a new look by doing many photographic things. Besides angles and coverage, we used a tobacco filter over all the day exteriors and another warming filter over the night exteriors. It's very traditional now to light night as blue. We lit night warmly because my feeling is in LA in the summertime, really it isn't cobalt blue like in so many Tony Scott, Ridley Scott films or commercials. And so we took a very warm palette to this film, and part of the idea was the cars. These were the things that had color. If you look in the background, all the background colors are extremely muted. We chose locations without bright colors. If there was a house or something that was brightly lit, brightly painted, we asked the people permission to repaint their houses to white or gray or light brown so that we could keep the world visually muted except for the cars, which would be so vibrant as to burn up the screen. Part of the visual design and part of the thought process that goes in to any movie where you're trying to say, how can I bring the audience into a world even when they're not aware of it, even when I'm doing things that are subtle, not screaming, but help them feel what it's like to be these characters, empathize with these characters. And hardware is great, action scenes are great, but the degree to which I can create empathy between you, the viewer, and these characters is the degree to which I feel the film will be successful and I will have done my best job. Again, take a look at the street, all muted colors. We repainted these houses, and here come these vibrant colors in the cars. Milkovich Hayes, our wardrobe designer, did a very interesting job in that kept the main cast having very realistic wardrobe and let the flashy, wild stuff be either on Rick Yoon or the race scene itself. So we carefully chose these clothes for each and every person, as you do in every film, but we didn't want to over stylize our heroes, our main protagonists. The group scenes, that's where you'll see the flashy street clothes, the piercings, the mega tats, the wild haircuts. Just because sometimes when you put a real thing in the foreground of a film, it seems forced. So I felt, and Sonia executed beautifully, this sort of frame, this wild and really off the hook looking group of people and characters in the background around our foreground leads to give the feeling of that good texture, but not make it feel forced. It was almost all improvised and covered with many cameras. Went through 10 or 20 different cuts. Paul Walker tried to make peace with Vince in this scene. We felt it wasn't good for his character. It was Peter Honessa, the editor's instinct, that we should keep Brian a tougher character. So right here, he actually handed Vince that beer and was sort of trying to make peace, but it failed. So it didn't make our hero look good. So we took that out, and luckily you don't realize who gave the beer to Vince, and I put a line in from Johnny Strong, so you psychologically believe that Leon handed it to him. Stealing from Edward Hopper, the great American painter who liked to look through windows and paint scenes which had a mysterious objectivity. Very fond of using this real location up in Echo Park in a way like this, a very unconventional framing, not really seeing the two people clearly, kind of obscured, but looking through the window on a life, an ordinary life in a city on a summer night, and then jumping back in for one of my favorite moments. This scene is actually a biblical story, the story of Haman, where the Bible, I remembered, said something about what should the king do for the man he most wants to reward, and the villain says, give him this and give him that, and he winds up giving the Jewish hero the reward and punishing Haman, the persecutor, being hoisted on his own petard. So I took that structure, and David...
I'm going to take a break for 2 minutes. I finish in a 2 minutes break. 2 minutes break.
I wrote this beautiful scene where Jordana basically asks Vince what he wants. He wants to take her to this restaurant, to Cha Cha Cha, a real restaurant in Los Angeles, a very good Brazilian kind of restaurant, and she gives the reward of her date to Paul Walker, and a very good audience-pleasing moment, and a wonderful moment for the comeuppance of Vince, who's been a real dick to Paul and to our hero, but who is the one character who knows the truth, who knows that he's not what he seems, and is convinced that he's a cop and has always been right. So it's a nice twist on a twist again, that this is to be so, and of course it twists again in the third act when Vince is hurt in the hijacking gone wrong, and it's the actual mechanism by which Brian O'Connor, Paul Walker's character, has to confess that he really is a cop to Vin Diesel. Twist on a twist. We have Noel back, and we lead the viewer to believe that the 3 Honda Civics they've been looking for are actually Hector's. So we're at El Gato Negro, a club we actually built on an empty location right across from a garage we found in El Segundo. Again, here's what I mean by the clothes. These clothes are much more extreme than the clothes our characters wear. We're in the Hispanic American LA scene. There's a refinery in the background. Here's a real functioning garage, back alley, where we were shooting, and you see that the clothes on the kids here are a little much more high styled than our cast. I remember particularly because my son Kyle came to me to visit, and he had blue hair suddenly. That was interesting. And being the hip dad I am, I said he looked good. We are in this place now where the police procedural starts to kick in a big way, as Brian has to figure out who to believe is the hijacking team that's been preying on these 18-wheelers for some months. Very, very intent to go from patrolman to detective. One of the ways in the police department to make this move quickly, to be promoted quickly to plain clothes, to get your gold shield as a detective, is to go undercover. And that's why so many young cops do go undercover, which is a very tricky business, because in going undercover, as we know from Miami Vice and Donnie Brasco, that sometimes you get more in love with the world that you're supposed to be breaking up than the job you originally had with being a policeman, because you have to act so convincingly that you are what you're supposed to be in a false world, as opposed to the truth of you, and the truth and the falseness get confused. And that was very important in this scene, because Vince, who hates Paul Walker's character for the girl, for being a cop, would just as soon blow him away and leave him in a dumpster there, has got Vin Diesel somewhat convinced that he is in fact a narc. And it's at this moment that Brian must reach into himself and pull out a convincing truth, a truth that will overlay all the facts of this situation, make Vin believe that he's still just a racer, that he's down here breaking into garages, not as a cop for evidence, but as a street racer. And Paul did a very convincing job of convincing Vin. And you can watch as Vince realizes that his friend Dominic is buying the entire story, and he's none too happy about it. So movie magic, we ran out of night. It was summer, the nights were short. We've covered these masters, and Paul and Matt Schultz here had done all this work, and every time you see Vin Diesel, we are inside the garage. We created an instant set, lit it to be like it would match the exterior, but we're in the back of the garage, we're inside the garage, and it's bright daylight out. Bright daylight now. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 8 o'clock in the morning.
Let's go for
8 o'clock in the morning. The flexibility of film, when you have the talent of an Erickson Core as a DP, the quick thinking set dressers, and my own decision to not come back another night, but to hold Vin's coverage back, to do it inside, and a fine actor like Vin who can keep the mood even though the circumstances have totally changed. Not every actor can do it or is willing to do it. We're in another garage, each garage trying to be a different environment, where we're trying to shoot each scene like this in a slightly different style. Nice cut from a xenon flashlight flare out to xenon flashlight flare out, and make the cut in the flare to jump locations and save the shoe leather. The time spent just walking around. Here, another set of clues, of course, something that's going to lead him down a very false path. All of these sculptures down in Little Saigon, all of Confucius and his disciples, are all carved in Vietnam out of Carrara marble. You saw them earlier in the introduction to Rick Yoon. Very interesting feature of a little-known place called Westminster, where a great deal of the South Vietnamese immigrants migrated after the war in Vietnam here in the Los Angeles area. Here comes Rick Yoon and his Honda 2000, the roll call showing all the great parts and body part companies that have been used in the building of the car. This is very common in all the racing cars to, promote the elements that made the car come together. Ted the Fence is for holding back these complex engines that a week before the big conclave in the desert called Race Wars would in fact start to become even more valuable than they were when Rick Yoon's character made the deal for them. So when you got a sticky situation, you need to apply a little lubricant. Gruesome scene. One of the few scenes that the MPAA made us cut back to get the PG-13, which was very important to me because I really wanted.
Okay. That's the part A. Let me go see it continuing. Part B coming soon.